In this video, I'll be talking about simple and compound interest. So let's paint this scenario. So let's say you went to a bank and they told you that you should drop 10,000 naira, right? And then they're also telling you that if you drop this amount of money, they will give you 10% annual interest. Annual interest. So the question is, and they are telling you annual simple interest. Let me be more specific. Simple interest. So the question is, what does the bank mean when they tell you they will give you 10% annual simple interest? So this is basically what they mean. What simple interest is talking about is simple interest is the additional, you can see it as the additional earning aside your initial deposit. So just say this way. So it means you're going to get this additional money aside your initial deposit. So what do we call the initial deposit? That's this 10,000 naira. We call this 10,000 naira the principal. So that is the technical name given to the initial deposit. Then the extra earning, the extra earning is what is known as the interest, right? But this interest could be simple or compound. So I'm going to talk about the difference later on, but now I'm going to talk in terms of simple interest, right? And to get your simple interest, they typically tell you the rate. So there's a concept known as the rate. The rate in this example is 10%. So the rate can be written in terms of percentage or in terms of decimal. If you write in terms of decimal, it is going to be in this format, right? So now let's put this whole thing together. So then again, another thing to also note is they will also tell you the time that the money will be given to you. So let's say the bank told you that, oh, we're going to give you this money after 2 years. So they are telling you that they're going to give you this extra earning after 2 years. So the question on your mind is, what will be your earning, your extra earning after 2 years? So how do you calculate that? You calculate that using the concept of simple interest. So your extra earning, which is your simple interest, can be calculated as your principal. This is your principal, which is P. You multiply by the rate, then multiply by the time, divided by 100, right? But before we look into this formula deeply, let's look at how we could calculate this, let's say using manual or using a systematic approach. So if someone told you you'll be collecting 10% every year, 10% of your principal, what does that mean? It means in the first year, that is after year one, your extra earning will be 10% of the deposit, which is 10,000. So if you take 10% of this, 10% of this is equivalent to 10 over 100, right? Times 10,000, and that will give you 1,000 naira. So at the end of the first year, you're going to get 1,000 naira. So at the end of the second year, what are you going to get? The same thing, because the simple interest assumes that you get that fixed earning every year. So now, at the end of the second year, what are you going to get? You're going to get 10% of that same deposit, right? 10% of 10,000, and that will give you 1,000 naira. So at the end of 2 years, what will be your total earning? So end of 2 years, it means your total earning will be your extra. Let's first calculate your extra earning, which is the interest. Your extra earning will be 1,000 plus 1,000, and that will give you 2,000 naira. That's your extra earning, right? This is not your deposit, your extra earning, more or less like your profit, right? Then what will now be your total amount at the end of 2 years? That will be your deposit, right? Then plus your extra earning, and that's 12,000. So this is what simple interest is all about. It's all about calculating your extra earning every year. You add them up, and that gives you your simple interest. So now let's go back to the formula. Let's use this formula to calculate what we just did. So we know that we are meant to get 2,000 as our extra earning, and our total amount should be 12,000. So let's see how the formula comes into play. So now we know that simple interest is equal to the principal times the rate times time over 100. Note that this 100 is to convert this rate to decimal. We assume that the rate is in percentage. So that is the reason why we have over 100. But if you write your rate as in decimal form, you don't need this 100. So now let's look at the initial example. So we know that the rate is 10%, right? Then we know that the principal, the initial deposit, is 10,000, and we know that the time for us to get our interest is 2 years. So what do you think the interest, which is the extra earning, will be? The simple interest will be the principal, which is 10,000, right? Times rate, which is 10, times time, which is 2, divided by 100. If you divide this, you're going to get 2,000 naira. So the simple interest is 2,000, which is exactly what we got earlier. So there's another concept called the total amount. The total amount at the end of 2 years is the simple interest plus the principal. So total amount is always the interest plus the initial deposit. That is what you get at the end of the day. So in this case, the total amount is always going to be the sum of these two. So that means we're going to have 2,000 plus the principal. That will be 12,000. So that is what the whole idea of simple interest is all about. It's all about you calculating your extra earning over a given period of time. So that is what simple interest is all about. What about how do you calculate other things? So let's say you know the interest and you are asked to calculate the rate or the time. How do you do that? So we're going to make R a subject of the formula. So given that given that the R is unknown, that is you don't know the rate, but you know every other thing, your rate will be equal to 100 times interest divided by principal then over time. Let's say you don't know the time. The time will be 100 times interest divided by principal times the rate. Let's say you don't know the principal, but you know the interest. So to calculate that, you are going to do the following: rate times time. So this formula, they will help you calculate different parameter or variable in simple interest formula. So it's also possible that you know the total amount, but you don't know the principal and all of that. The same thing, you can make P the subject of the formula here. So that is what simple interest is all about. We're going to solve more example later on, but let's compare simple interest with compound interest. Let's see what's different between these two. So let's talk about compound interest. Using that initial example where we have our principal, which is our initial deposit, as 10,000, right? And we know the rate to be 10% and the time to be 2 years. So let's say the manager of the bank told you that you are going to receive compound interest. What does that mean? the previous calculation, we talked about simple interest. So what does it mean if you are told that you're going to receive compound interest? So to get compound interest, we need to calculate the total amount. And after calculating the total amount, then we calculate the compound interest. So that's one way to go about it. But then I'm going to explain this concept without using the formula. Let me give you a kind of intuition into what compound interest is all about. So this is exactly what the bank would do if they tell you you are going to receive compound interest. Don't forget that interest means your extra earning. So what would be your extra earning after 2 years? Now, in the case of compound interest, at the end of your first year, the first year, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get 10% of 10,000, and that will give you 10 over 100 times 10,000, and that will give you 1,000 naira. Okay, but to calculate that of second year, this is what happens. Instead of you having your principal as 10,000, what the bank will do is they will roll over this your initial earning, this 1,000. They will update your principal as follows. They will take that, this will be your new principal, right? The new principal at the end of the first year will be, or at the beginning of the second year, will be 10,000 plus the 1,000 you've earned. In the case of compound interest, the assumption is that you roll over your interest, you don't withdraw it. So when the bank tells you, I'm going to give you, we're going to give you compound interest, what they're saying is each time you make more money, that is, each time your deposit gives you an interest, they roll back that interest, they put it back into your account. They don't give you to withdraw. And because they are putting it back into your account, your initial deposit would have increased by 1,000 in this case. So that means your principal at the beginning of the second year will be 11,000. Now this 11,000 is what will be used to calculate your next interest. So which means at the end of year 2, we're going to take the same 10%, but this time around 10% of our new amount, our new principal, which is 11,000, right? And if you do this math, you're going to get 1,100 naira as your interest for the second year. So you can see that in compound interest, you continue rolling over your interest to get new principal. And that is why compound interest tend to give you more earning than simple interest. So let's now ask ourselves, what will now be our total earning, our extra earning, that is our compound interest, CI, right? What will be our compound interest at the end of 2 years? Our compound interest will be 1,000 in the first year plus 1,100 in the second year, which will give us 2,100 altogether. So this implies that the extra earning will be 2,100. Then our total amount at the end of the 2 years will be, as usual, the interest, in this case compound interest, plus the initial principal, right? So which means we're going to have 2,100 plus 10,000, and that will give 12,100. So you can see that if a bank tells you that they are going to give you compound interest, you will earn more than simple interest, especially if the duration, the time that it takes for you to get that money, if the time is more than 1 year. If the time is 1 year, it will give the same result as simple interest. But if the time is more than 1 year, compound interest will always give you a value that is greater than simple interest. So this is how you calculate compound interest step by step. Even if you have 10 years, you can still calculate them step by step by rolling over your interest after each year. So now, what is the formula for calculating compound interest? So let's take a look. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the formula for calculating the total amount for compound interest. Before we calculate the compound interest, the total amount is the principal times 1 plus the rate over 100 raised to the power of the time to mature, right? So this is the amount. This is not the compound interest. But we know that amount is always equal to interest plus principal. So our compound interest will be amount minus principal, right? So we can easily say that compound interest is the amount at the end of 2 years or whatever year we are dealing with minus the principal. So this is what you get. So this is the formula for calculating compound interest. So let's take a look at this. Let's try to verify if what we got earlier can be obtained using this formula. So let's check it out. So the amount in this case is, we know the principal to be 10,000 in our example, right? The rate is 10%, which is 10 here. Then divided by 100, then the time is 2. So if you try to simplify this, you're going to get 10,000, and this is 1.1 raised to the power of 2. If you multiply this out, you're going to get 10,000 times 1.21, and that will give you 12,100. 12,100. So now, what do you think would be our compound interest? It will be the amount minus the original principal, which is 12,100 minus 10,000, and that will give you 2,100. And this is exactly what we got in the previous example. So that is what compound interest is all about. Okay, so I'm going to look at more examples from JAMB past questions and WAEC past questions. So let's take a look. So let's take some questions from JAMB past questions. So the first question we're going to solve is question number 5 in year 2005. So let's take a look at this question. The question states that if the interest of 150, so let's write out what we know. We're told that if the interest, which is I, of 150 for 2.5 years, so that's time is 2.5 years, so we can say 2.5 years, is if the interest of this. So if this is referring to the principal, for them to say if the interest of this. Let's solve some questions from JAMB past question. The first question I'm going to take is JAMB past question year 2005, question 5. So the question states as follows: if the interest of 150 for 2.5 years is 4.5 naira, find the interest on 250 for 6 months at the same rate. So let's break down this question. Say the interest of 150 naira. So what that 150 naira is referring to is the principal, because they are saying if we take interest of this principal of this 150, right? If we take that interest for a period of 2.5 years, that's 2.5 years, right? If the interest is 4.5 naira, right? If the interest is this, find the interest on. So they are telling us that if we get this interest for this period of time and on this principal, if the interest happens to be 4.5 naira, then what should be the interest if the new principal, so let's say this is P2, if the new principal is 250, and the new time is 6 months. 6 months. Note that your time should be in years. So 6 months is half of the year, which is 0.5 year, right? Now they are asking us to find, this is the second time, they are asking us to find the second interest if we have the same rate, these are the same rate, if the rate here is the same thing as the rate here, right? So which means it suggests that we need to figure out what the rate is here and apply that same rate here. So that means we're going to try to get the rate for this first scenario. So from the previous slide, the rate can be calculated as 100 times the interest divided by principal times time. So what is the interest here? That's 4.5. What is the principal? That's 150. And what is the time? That's 2.5. If we divide this and we simplify further, we are going to get the following. If you multiply 10 by this, you're going to get this whole thing will give you 3. Then you're going to get something like this, 3 over 2.5. And then if you divide, that will give you 30 over 25. And that will give you 5 here. That's 5 into, okay, let's sort simplify this. That will give you 6, then 5, that's 1.2%. So it means the interest rate is 1.2% per annum, right? So if we apply that same interest here, what do you think would be the simple interest? So if you apply an interest rate of 1.2, what do you think would be the interest? The interest, as we know, can be calculated as PRT, which is principal times rate times time over 100. And then what will this give us? That's 250 for this scenario times rate, which is 1.2 times time, which is 0.5 divided by 100. If you try to simplify, you're going to get this as your answer. You're going to get 1.5 naira. So this would be the answer for the second interest rate. So that's the answer. That's option A. So let's take a look at another question. So this time around, we're going to take question number 5 from the year 2008. So in this particular year, the question states calculate the simple interest on 7,500. So whenever you get something like interest on, that number that follows after on is typically the principal. So the principal is 7,500 for 8 years. So the time period is 8 years. Then the rate is 5% per annum. So what is the simple interest? The simple interest is principal times rate times time divided by 100, which is 7,500 times 5 times 8 divided by 100. And that will give you 75 times 5 times 8, and the answer is 3,000 naira. And that gives you option A as the correct option. So let's look at the third question. For the third question, we are going to take question 4 from the year 2011. So let's take a look at the question. A man invested 5,000 for 9 months at 4%. What is the simple interest? So let's write what we know. We know that the principal, a man invested, so the original investment, the original deposit is always the principal. So the person invested 5,000 and the time is within a period of 9 months. It should be noted that your time should be converted to year always. So 9 months in year is 9 over 12, right? And that is equivalent to 9 here, 3 here rather is 3. then 3 here is 4. So that's 3 over 4 years. And you can represent it in decimal as 0.75 years. Okay, so we know the rate to be 4% per annum. So that's 4%, right? So what is the interest? The interest is PRT over 100. So what is the principal? That's 5,000. What is the rate? That's 4. What's the time? That's 0.75 in years. Then this is over 100. If you simplify this, the answer will become 150 naira, and that's option A. Okay, let's take a look at another question. So this time around, we're going to look at question 38. Question 38 from the question 28 rather from 2016 past question. So the question states, how long will the sum of 2000 accumulate to? So let's write out what we know. How long will the sum of 2000 accumulate to 2480 at a rate of 8%? So let's first write what we are sure of. So we know the rate is 8%, right? So the question now is, what is the 2000 and what is the 2480? Is the 2000 the principal or is the 2480 the principal? So this I should think about it. How long will the sum of 2000 accumulate to? So if you think about it, it's as if initially you have 2000 and after a while it accumulated or it eventually accumulated to 2480. So what do you think the principal is? The principal is the initial amount before you got the extra earning. So the principal is going to be the 2000, which is the initial amount. Then what do you think the 2480 is? Is it interest? Is it something else? That amount is not interest because they said how long will that initial amount accumulate to something else? That new value is the total new amount. So it is the amount you get at the end, not interest. Interest is the extra earning, not the total value at the end of the day. So the total amount is always the sum of the principal and the interest. So which means that new amount after adding the interest is 2,480, right? So it means this is amount, this is principal. So we can easily calculate the interest from here. We can easily calculate the interest. So the interest in this case is 2,480 minus 2,000. So it's basically interest can also be written as the final amount minus principal. So it's basically something like this, A minus P, right? Now, if you take this difference, you're going to get 4,800. So this is the interest. But the question is not just the interest. The question is how long. It means the question has to do with time. So we are asked to calculate the time. But why you need to get the interest is because you need the interest to get the time. So that's the reason why we have to calculate the interest before the time. So what is the time? The time is, you can calculate the time as follows, as 100 times interest divided by principal times the rate. So we need the interest, and that's the reason why we have to calculate the interest from the amount. So what is the time in this case? So that's 100 times the interest, that's 480, divided by the principal, which is 2000, times the rate, which is 8 in this case. So if you divide this, you cut all the zeros and you simplify further. If you say 2 here, this will give you 24. Then 8 in 24 will give you 3. So we're going to get 3 years as our answer. And that means the correct option is option D. So that's how you calculate the time in this particular example. So now let's look at another question. This time around, we are going to take our question from WAEC, that's WAS past question. So let's take a look. We're going to take another example, but this time around, it will be a question related to compound interest. So we're going to look at why question, theory question in 2016, section 1, question 1b. So let's take a look at the question. A principal of 5,600 Ghana cedi, right? 5,600 Ghana cedis was deposited for 3 years. So we know the time is 3 at compound interest. Take note of that, compound interest. If the interest end, that is the compound interest end, if that amount happens to be 1,200 Ghana cedis, find correct 3 significant figures, the interest rate per annum. So in this case, we were told to look for the interest. So now we know the compound interest, we know the time, we know the principal, but we don't know the rate, right? So the first thing we want to do is to look at the formula available to us. We know that we can calculate the total amount after 3 years as follows. We can use this formula to do that. 1 plus rate over 100. This will give you the total amount. Then we know that the compound interest can be calculated as the amount minus the principal. So the first thing we want to do is we can substitute this value. We can take this value as 1 plus r over 100 raised to the power of t minus p. So you can write this compound interest as follows. So the issue here is we know the compound interest, we know the principal, we know the time, but we don't know the rate. So now we're going to solve for the rate. So to solve for the rate, we substitute all the values. So the compound interest is given as 1,200, right? The principal, we know that to be 5,600. Then we don't know the rate, so we write it this way. But we know the time to be 3, and we know the principal, that's minus 5,600. So what do we do next? We try to collect like terms. So let's transfer this to this side. So I'm going to get 1,200 plus 5,600 equals 5,600. Then you have 1 plus r over 100 raised to the power of 3. So if you add this up, you are going to get the following. I'm going to get 6,800 equals 5,600 times 1 plus r over 100 raised to the power of 3. So the next thing we do is to divide both sides by 5,600. So that will give you 6,800 over 5,600 equals 1 plus r over 100 raised to the power of 3. So let's try to simplify this and let's reduce it as follows. So we can write it this way. We can say 1 plus r over 100 raised to the power of 3 equals 68 over 56. So I'm going to go to the next page to continue this solution. So here we have 1 plus r over 100 raised to the power of 3 equals 68 over 56, right? We can break this down further too. If you divide both sides by, let's say, 4. 4 in 6, that will give you 1. Another 2 in 28, that will give 7, right? Then 4 in 5, that's 1. Then 4 in 6, in 16 rather, that is 4. Okay, so The next phase is we need to take away this power. So to remove this power from the left hand side, we need to multiply both sides by 1 over raised to the power of 1 over 3. So if you do the same thing here, if you add raised to the power of 1 over 3 on both sides, then it cancels out 1 over 3 here. Then you have 1 plus r over 100, and that gives you the following. It's the same thing as the cube root of 17 over 14. So if you use a calculator to simplify this, you can convert this to decimal, then look for the cube root of this value. If you do that, you're going to get the following. You're going to get 1.06686. So if you make r the subject of the formula, you get the following. R over 100 equals 1.06686 minus 1. Then r over 100 becomes 0.06686. Then r is 0.06686 times 100, and that will give you 6.686. And in percentage, right? And if you convert to three significant figures, that's 1, 2, 3, you're going to get 6.6, because this is 6.69, because the last 6 is greater than 5. It is equal or greater than 5, 0 and 5, so you increment this 8 by 1. So this becomes the answer in three significant figures. So this brings us to the end of this concept on simple interest and compound interest.